Hello, we are now officially 25 years into the 21st century, and it's fun to consider what might be the best books of this century so far. Of course, everyone has their own personal opinion, and over the summer, the New York Times did a whole thing when they collated together lots of different suggestions to create this master list of 100 books, and I made a whole video reacting to that, but I've been trying to figure out what would be the best way to come up with my own personal list of best books. And so I decided I would just pick 25 books because that's a good number. But rather than going sequentially year by year and picking a book from each year, I think that the books that'll really stand the test of time are the ones that really stand out in my memory after reading hundreds of books over the past 25 years. And so I just sat down, I created a list of the books that I first thought of and that really stick out in my mind and that I think are really significant. And so I'm going to go through and discuss those 25 books and what it is about them that really stands out for me personally. And I would love to hear if you have read any of these books or if you're interested in reading any of them now, or what is your own personal list of 25 best books from the past 25 years. Let me know about that in the comments below. Something that very neatly aligns with this exercise is the fact that I happen to have moved to London in 2000, in the beginning of the year 2000, so exactly 25 years ago, and a book that made a significant impression upon me when I first moved here, and which was big news at the time, was Zadie Smith's debut novel, White Teeth. And I read this book and I was completely in awe with it in the way that it portrays a multicultural city and family and individuals who are contending with issues to do with the past, but also trying to figure out their lives in the present. And there are so many cultural references in this that made this story really lively and fun to read and just gave me a new vision in how contemporary fiction can be written. A historical novel that made such a big impression on me was Fingersmith by Sarah Waters. This novel is so lively and fun. It's so plot heavy as there are so many twists and turns in the story that is such a thrill to read. But to tell this Dickensian tale and to look at this historical period in a way which is so refreshing and new, but also tells a lesbian love story was such a wonderful experience. So finely detailed. It's so rich in the descriptions in this story, but also the pace of it and how Waters chooses to reveal certain information at certain moments in the story. It's such a joy to read. Oryx and Crake by Margaret Atwood, and I was kind of surprised when I first wrote down this novel, but then the more I thought about it, the more I realized what an impression it made on me of portraying this dystopian landscape and the end of humankind as a way of trying to envision how we as humans really aren't set in our, we think our natures are kind of a set thing that we can't change about ourselves, but really there is nothing fixed about human nature in this way, that we can continue to evolve and change as social groups, as a society, and build into something much better than what has occurred in the past. And we don't need to continuously keep making the same mistakes. Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell by Susanna Clarke. I remember feeling quite intimidated when I first picked up this very big book, but once I got into the story, I was absorbed by it and I didn't want it to end because it is so lively and imaginative how she presents this alternative history and invokes this sense of magic, but also the way that she creates the relationships of her character with all of this beautiful detail of evoking these different time periods and the environment of these characters and their struggle, their epic struggle in this larger battle, but also the personal battles that they are going through as individuals. Cloud Atlas by David Mitchell. This novel completely captivated me in the way that it playfully utilizes different genres to tell a number of equally compelling stories, and the momentum with which these stories are told as it progresses into the future and then fans back out into the past. It gives such a different view of the march of progress, of human progress throughout time, but also telling these stories which are so juicy and picking out all of the little details that connect them as they move forward. It is such wicked fun, and I had such a great experience going to a literary event earlier this year when there was a new publication of this novel celebrating its anniversary, and David Mitchell came and sat down next to me, just like coincidentally, and I really wanted to speak to him, but there were so many people there that wanted to have a word with him that I never even got to have a chance to have a chat. All I did was get a glass of water for him, for which he thanked me, and it was just a really lovely moment. The Master by Colm Tóibín. This novel perfectly captures the endeavor of trying to create art and how the personal plays into that process of trying to make something much bigger and more substantial and lasting than the individual experience through the life of Henry James, of recreating that life. And I was surprised how captivated I was by this novel, because I'm not the biggest Henry James fan, but the way that Tóibín recreates his life and his mentality to trace that experience and that process of creation is so beautiful and powerful. And I just remember reading this book and being so enraptured by it and his prose, and had the wonderful experience of going to see him talk about it alongside Alan Hollinghurst. A Year of Magical Thinking by Joan Didion. And I feel like this came at a significant point in my life when I was really starting to contemplate mortality, and that I will eventually lose some of the people in my life that are closest to me. And the way that this memoir considers grief and the process of dealing with that and maintaining a sense of sanity as an individual through this incredibly difficult process. It's so beautiful how she articulates that in this very intense and very personal story. The Road by Cormac McCarthy, which is such an atmospheric book that it completely seized me in its depiction of this dystopian future, which is so desolate and bleak, but the beauty and power of this very intense father and son relationship as they are traveling down this road and endeavoring to maintain a sense of hope for a possibility of not just the future, but the next day, and how we face so many large-scale issues in both the wider world and in our personal lives, that it sometimes feels like the next day feels like so distant away and so precarious, but maintaining this sense of hope and love throughout this, and the way this novel novel presents that I think is so powerful. Olive Kitteridge by Elizabeth Strout. This collection of stories and which present a personality who is very difficult, very honorary, very abrasive in so many ways, but is also so lovable and someone who has such a good heart. It's such it was to me a revelation to read about a character who can be so difficult and on the surface very unlikable, but who is so compelling in this way, and also as a depiction of my native state of Maine in the US. It's just a story and a character who completely captured my heart. Wolf Hall by Hilary Mantel. Now, I didn't immediately fall in love with this novel. When I first tried to read it, I found it so dense and really difficult to get into with all of its historical detail and the complexity of its plot and many different characters. But when I sat down and really dedicated myself to reading it and trying to understand it, I was completely sold on it and understand all of the hype around it, and the way that Mantel completely recreates this historical period and gives such a new view on it, I think is completely masterful. The writing is so beautiful. The complexity of her characters' psychologies and their relationships and the larger political goings on of this royal court and the larger English society of the time. It's just so incredibly done, and of course it can't really be considered outside of the whole trilogy that she's created. I mean, I really consider all of these books together as one. Another book that took me a couple of goes to really get into was Julian Barnes' The Sense of an Ending, because I read this close to when it first came out and thought, oh, well, that's okay, but I just didn't really think that much more about it. But then I reread it a decade or so later and felt this is so profound in the way that it considers memory and our relationship to the past, and the way that we can revise our own personal history for our own needs, and how this is just a human compulsion, but one that we ought to be aware of and conscious of, that this is something we might do, and when we interact with other people, that we should keep this in mind, that we have our own personal way of viewing history, which will probably come up against how other people view it, and that there's really no one way of definitively knowing the entirety of the past in this way. It's a very personal and kind of low-key story in a lot of ways that says so much more than what it does in its own little small circular way, and this I think just speaks to the way that a lot of really great literature is one that needs to be really carefully considered, like over the course of one's lifetime. That just the initial reading experience, we might not get everything from it, especially from the particular point we are in our own personal lives. Americanah by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, and this novel is such a great romance, but also a romance that follows how we as individuals are really caught up in the waves of history, and that plays so much of a factor in the personal decisions we make and the relationships that we have, as it follows two individuals who have an initial romance but then are split apart and live in different parts of the world, but then come back together in their their country of origin of Nigeria, and because of the political events of the time and the way that they personally have changed over time, how this has altered their connection with each other, and it is just so beautifully done. It's such an epic romance in this way, and I am so excited that Adichie finally has a new novel coming out next year in 2025. Lila by Marilynne Robinson, and I wasn't expecting too much from this novel because I'd read Gilead in the past, and it didn't have that much of an effect upon me. But when I read this novel, I was so profoundly moved by it. It's a very specific story, but one that really speaks to so many universal issues and aspects of human experience, of how we're all profoundly alone in the world and trying to survive, as it depicts the story of a girl who's kind of unwanted, who's pushed to the side, but who has resilience and who persists and finds some really meaningful connections which she didn't expect, but also experiences a lot of hardship. And so the way she survives through all of this, I was so moved by it, and felt it is incredibly profound. How to Be Both by Ali Smith. This novel made me very aware that it's not just the content of the stories that we tell, but it is how they are told, the language we use to tell it, but also the way we organize these stories, because this novel is composed of two sections, one set in the distant past and one closer to the present, but how this was published, it was like half of the publications of this, it begins with the story set in the past, and then the other half that were published begin with the story that is set closer to the present. And so the reader doesn't know what they're going to get until they open it up and start reading it. And the way that Smith creates her characters that are so lively and unique and individual, and how all of these traits about themselves come out through their dialogue and the very playful conversations they have with each other, I just find so pleasurable to read, but also it like opens me up to the possibilities of what fiction can do. The Parcel by Anosh Irani. This novel really helps me understand the full complexities of individual identity, but also the difficulties of personal choice when we are in such a difficult situation ourselves that it seems like we don't have agency to make our own choices, but that we can maintain a sense of social and moral responsibility through this, and also like a sense of humor about life itself, even though life can seem to be so desolate at times. So it presents the story of Hijra in India, who has often been discarded and set aside, but found a sense of community with like-minded people, but is also put in this impossible situation where Madhu, the narrator of this novel, is charged with training a girl prostitute, and through this very devastating story maintains her own sense of integrity, which is so beautiful and inspiring. The Years by Annie Ernaux, translated by Alison L. Strayer. And this book, I mean, it's kind of unclassifiable in what it is. It's both like a memoir and a social history and a novel, and it tells the story of a particular group of people and a community in a section of France in a way which opens up the past and history in a way which I've never considered before, that the personal is kind of melded with the social, and how this changes our understanding of society, I think is so profound and moving, and it is just beautifully composed. Lincoln in the Bardo by George Saunders, and this novel, which takes one of the most famous figures from from American history and brings him into the present in a time which feels so tangible and real as he's experiencing grief for the loss of his young son and mourning him in a graveyard, but also how all these lively spirits from the past rise up in this graveyard and are having these conversations around him and this dialogue about their own individual circumstances, but also the past. It just represents this kind of confluence of how we are caught in the flow of time, and it's captured in a way which is so funny and entertaining, but also very sobering and so meaningful. Night, Sleep, Death, the Stars by Joyce Carol Oates, a really epic novel which begins with a tragedy and an injustice, and which is something that occurs every day and which just kind of goes by unnoticed, but there are long-term consequences to this. And so how it shows how the consequences of this incident reverberates throughout this family and their individual experiences over the coming months is so moving and beautiful, but also how she shows the real difficulty and complexities of family life itself, how there are different power relationships between family members, and the difficulty as us as individuals of being known as a certain thing in our family, but we are growing and changing all the time, but our family still see us as that one thing. How she contains all of that in the drama of this story that plays out over hundreds of pages is so compelling and well written. Ducks Newburyport by Lucy Ellman, which is a novel that could go in one of two ways. There are some readers that absolutely fell in love with it, and there are others that were really put off by its very unique and particular style. And I was someone that was completely captivated by this book and found it so mesmerizing, following the cadence of the thoughts of this individual as she goes throughout her day and her domestic life and her work, baking lots of things for her own business, but also caring for her children and her household, and how she is considering everything that is going on in the world and drawing upon individual references from her own experience, both cultural references and facts from the past, and things that aren't facts from the past, that aren't true, and how this all comes together in her mind in a great big jumble, and we follow this throughout a very long story. I just found so much fun, and I was just completely hypnotized by it. But how this book, I don't think it's given enough credit, how it does have an actual plot and story which plays out to a very dramatic ending, and which I think is totally worth of going through this entire book. But the actual content of itself, of that book and of this book, and following her thoughts throughout this period of time is just, for me, was such a joy. Empire of Pain by Patrick Radden Keefe is such a powerful and brilliant book of nonfiction, investigating a very wealthy and powerful family and the part they played in the drug industry and the current opioid crisis, and holding them to account through meticulous research, but also telling a story of the complexity of this family throughout the generations, and the way that things have been covered up over time, and that they have tried to whitewash whitewash certain things about their industry is so important, and this had such a significant impact on me. I'm thinking about these large-scale issues and how there are personal and family stories behind them, but that there are also so many consequences to these large-scale events, and what we are generally told about these events, and the publicity machine which manipulates us. It really made me aware of these things in a much larger way. And sort of related to these themes, but giving a very different context, there's Minor Detail by Adania Shibley, translated by Elizabeth Jacquet. And this very brief novel explores the history of a young Palestinian woman who was abused and raped and discarded, and but how it tells that individual story, but also an individual researching this story and trying to find out the truth of it and raise awareness of it. It shows how there are so many instances like this from the past which have been covered up or forgotten about or willfully ignored, and it speaks to much larger issues than the individual conflicts that it portrays so artfully. Demon Copperhead by Barbara Kingsolver, and the way that Kingsolver invokes the spirit of Dickens and brings it into a modern context to look at so many contemporary issues, but through a very personal story, and a character who is so lively and lovable that I just completely fell for him and following his story as he struggles to survive and has this aspiration to reach the sea, and he's looking forward to the future, even though the circumstances of his life are so difficult, and he's presented with so many obstacles and so much heartache, and but how he maintains a sense of integrity through this. I think it's just a wonder to behold, and I love this story so much. Solenoid by Mircea Cartarescu and translated by Sean Cotter, and this story, which is so intensely inward looking, it goes so far in that it expands out to something much bigger, and so it follows a teacher who is recording in meticulous detail on these notebooks the details of his life and his experience and his memories and his dreams, and how he goes into these surreal landscapes, how this captures something so essential about human experience, but also gives a very different view of history and Romanian history, and the influence of communism, and his perseverance through this, how it portrays this in a way which is so funny and clever, but makes so many profound statements about life. The Love Songs of W.E.B. Du Bois by Honoree Fanonne Jeffers, and I really feel like this novel didn't get the full recognition that it deserved. It's such a complex and layered story of an individual tale of a girl in her coming of age, but also reckoning with the past, and how it shows that we are really all a mixture of the people that have come before us, not just through our blood, but also through our ideas and our understanding of the world, and how we have inherited all of this and are reckoning with all of it constantly throughout our lives. I think it is so beautifully done. And finally, a book from this year that most immediately comes to mind is My Friends by Hisham Mittar, which is a story which shows how an individual can be caught up in the circumstances of history, which might lead to them being exiled from their home and from their past, but how we can persist and create a new life for ourselves and form new connections and find beauty and inspiration in the world through art and literature, and that inspires us to carry on and persist. And it's a story that made me aware of a particular history in London, which I wasn't previously aware of, and which was such a significant thing that occurred in the past. And I think how this shows this and captures all of this is so inspiring and beautifully rendered. So those are the first 25 books that came to mind when I just instantly set myself the task of making a list of the 25 best books of the 21st century so far. I'm sure on another day I might have picked other books, and I'm sure there are ones that I have forgot of and that I really ought to have mentioned, but these are the ones that came to my mind and have inspired me the most. I would love to hear if you have read any of these books, or if you are really motivated to read any of them now. I hope you are, if you haven't read some of them, because really I think they are all so special, and I hope that they do stand the test of time. But I would really love to hear about your own individual list as well, and if there are books that I've forgotten or might not have read, please let me know about that in the comments below. But I hope you're doing well and reading good things, and I'll speak to you again soon. Bye-bye.